And we are back. And as I promised, with me is Cory Doctorow.
Hi.
Hi, welcome to Fast Forward.
Thank you very much.
Second time you've been on. I think we interviewed you in a hotel room in Philadelphia one time.
Yeah, I've done lots of dodgy things in hotel rooms in Philadelphia.
Your latest book is For the Win, out from Tor. And it's a neat book. It's all about gold farming and international labor organizing and
video games.
Video games. Let's talk some about the research you did for it. Now, I know for the video game part of it, you're kind of married to kind of a world-class video gamer.
Yeah, my wife used to play Quake on the English national team, and now she's a games developer. She actually oversees games development for a broadcaster in the UK, and does really well. She won the best educational game at South by Southwest this year.
Wow, wow! So that part of the research, and plus, I'm sure you've played enough video games in your life.
I mean, I'm not a heavy gamer, but you know, being 38 in 2010 means that you grew up with every generation of video game ever, right? I mean, I started with Pong and have worked my way through it, just kind of accidentally become a video gamer. And you know, a typical evening in our household often consists of putting the baby to bed and then watching for an hour while my wife kills zombies, you know.
So the key activity in the book that drives everything is gold farming, which is in many of the MMOs out there. There are players that win gold and get items that they then sell for real money to other players.
Yeah, I mean, more to the point, they're doing repetitive tasks, repetitive, boring tasks in order to amass these virtual fortunes that they sell on for cash money to players who are either too short in their attention or too short on time to do them themselves. Most of the people who do the gold farming come from poor countries. Most of the people who do the buying come from rich countries. By some estimates, there's about 400,000 people earning some or all of their living from gold farming today.
And a lot of that's what this book is about. It is what I think you have called predicting the present.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, it's about what happens when they form a trade union and exploit the fact that even though they often live in places where independent trade unionism is against the law, like China, because they're all in the same video game together, they can organize and they can take advantage of the fact that the video game is not a place where their bosses can easily surveil them to organize behind their bosses' backs. And even if their bosses shut down a shop and reopen it in another part of the country or in a different country altogether, they can still organize with those new workers in the same way that, say, auto workers followed the Ford plants across America. Ford would shut down a plant and move it somewhere else to escape his union. The UAW would go to the next city too.
And they don't only go to different places in the game, they're moving from game to game in here to try to organize all of them and then moving out of that into, you know, the painters in China.
And the real world factories. I mean, you know, one way to get union organizers behind the barbed wire in a factory city in Guangzhou is to do it through the video game.
And the book takes place all over the world. It takes place in Mumbai, in was it Shenzhen in China, in Los Angeles. It's all
Singapore,
Indonesia,
Vietnam,
how did you do the research on? And you're not in the regular tourist areas in these cities. In Mumbai, or in the
Dharavi, the largest slum in the east.
Yeah, how did you do the research on? Because it felt like you were there when you were.
Yeah, I had been. So, I mean, I started doing just kind of the normal research you might expect. I read literally a couple hundred books on various subjects like economics and labor history, China and India, and so on. That was really productive, and that gave me a lot of places to go. One thing that I did that was super, super helpful before I actually went overseas was I subscribed to all the English language newspaper feeds of all the newspapers in India and China. And I didn't read every headline that came down. I couldn't have. I mean, just India alone was about 6,000 headlines a day. But I skimmed them just really quick and then clicked through on anything that looked vaguely interesting. And it gave me a huge amount of kind of substrate of context. So when I actually got to Mumbai, and I was able through contacts to get tours of parts of Mumbai that you might not otherwise see, and also to meet with people who were involved in anti-poverty organizing and union organizing and so on, I was able to just understand a lot of the stuff that was going on around me much better than I would have if I just gone in cold or just read some books. I kind of had this kind of just a whole lot of little bits of fact that cohered in many cases. You know, I would go down a street and see a billboard, and suddenly I'd connect it to a newspaper story, and then another newspaper story, and a little bit that I'd read in some book, and it would all snap together for me. So that was really productive. And then finally, you know, I went on the ground, and I was able to use contacts that I have through my online life and through my life in the civil liberties community to find organizers and activists who could take me around, who could show me places where I wouldn't have been able to go on my own. And that was also really, really good.
Now, were you able to do that in China as well? Because I would think that would be a tougher place to get into those areas.
I was able actually to get a lot of places in China that I didn't expect off the bat that I'd be able to go to. You know, one of the advantages of approaching this as a novel instead of, say, a comprehensive nonfiction account of you know, actual labor organizing in China or India is that you don't have to go to all the places to build up a picture in the round to report on it accurately. What you can do is go to a bunch of places, find the interesting things, and write the story around the interesting things you found. And so that was really helpful. I was really able to kind of, you know, tell the story that the pieces that I was able to investigate in detail let me tell. You know, instead of going in there with certain things that I wanted to go and see. Partly, I was aided by watching and reading firsthand accounts of other people who've gone in. There's a guy named Bunny Huang, Andrew Huang, who founded a company called Chumby, which make great little personal computing devices. But before that, he was an MIT engineer in the PhD program, and as a kind of hobby, he broke the security on the Xbox and figured out how to install your own operating system on it, and wrote a book about it called Cracking the Xbox. That's a very good book. And so he's done these presentations on getting the Chumby made, because he went to South China to have the Chumby made. And his first-person accounts of going into the factories and setting up the builds and doing the QA and all the rest of it were really helpful in writing the book as well.
Oh, that's fascinating. I mean, all the economics in the book was really interesting. The way the virtual economics impacts kind of the actual economics, and that there is in some ways not much difference between them.
Yeah, I mean, real-world economics is pretty abstract and virtual as it is, right? I mean, especially when you start to get into things like synthetic bonds, you know, where you have, you know, during the subprime bubble, there wasn't enough subprime debt for people to place bets against or on, and so they created synthetic bonds that consisted of bets on other bonds, but themselves didn't actually have any underlying asset. And so, you know, that's nothing more or less virtual than, say, selling a virtual sword from World of Warcraft. I mean, they're both entirely fictitious creations.
Yeah, and one thing you mentioned is that the virtual economies in these multiple player games, the World of Warcrafts, things like that some of them are among the top economies in the world.
Well, in the fiction account,
I mean, I'm wondering, how accurate is that?
I mean, the thing about the world's economies is that they follow a power law curve. So, you know, you have this very small number of very large economies, and then it shelves off very quickly. I mean, you know, sort of the difference between the 15th largest economy and the 18th largest economy is a very big gap. And then you start to get into these economies that are very, very small. And so because of that, you know, economies from virtual worlds can rank surprisingly high, like in the 40th or the 50th position in terms of the global economy.
And what's interesting that you bring up about them is that these are economies, in a sense, these are companies, who are based on not their productivity, not what they make, but based on how much fun they are in people's perceptions.
Yeah, that's one area where they're really different from a real-world economy, because there's lots of economies out there that aren't particularly fun. I mean, Singapore is a nice place to live, but no one would ever describe it as fun central. But the Singaporean dollar rises and falls based on how productive Singapore's economy is, not what the quality of you know, not how carefree they are there. Although you know, the quality of life in Singapore is pretty good. I don't want to smear Singapore here, but if a game stops being fun, the value of its assets necessarily declines, because nobody wants to live there anymore. And since those assets aren't exportable, since the assets really just only have value within the context of that game, if no one else wants to play the game anymore, you know, the value of the virtual sword in a game that nobody will see you wielding it in is very low. And you know, there's a great story about this where a game called EVE Online. It's a space game where you're either playing a pirate or a merchant, and you manage these long supply chains to move goods from one planet to the other. Some people call it spreadsheets in space. It's basically a game version of middle management tasks like supply chain logistics and HR. And the game designers one day decided that it was too easy to be a merchant and not fun enough to be a pirate, so they created a new class of pirate ship that made it much harder to be a merchant. And the merchant guilds were understandably very upset about this, and two prominent merchants decided that they were going to get their own back at the game. So they created a syndicate, and they asked all the other major merchants to pitch in, and they said, we're going to build a merchant spaceship that can defeat the pirates, and we're gonna make the game fun for merchants again. So they absorbed a stupendous amount of the liquid cash in the game, something like 80% of the liquid capital in the game, and then they resigned their accounts. It was a Ponzi scheme. There was no spaceship to be built. And what they did was they essentially destroyed the monetary supply of this video game. They created a deflationary whipsaw, because suddenly 80% of the cash in the game just literally vanished, like someone had, someone had pitchforked it into an incinerator. It just popped out of existence, and really kind of torqued the economy. And so it's pretty interesting to see what the relationship of fun and economics are.
Oh, that's wild. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well, what did they do in the game? What did the game owners do?
Well, I think that was around the time they hired their first chief economist. They now have a chief economist. It was the first game to hire an economist. And interestingly enough, they're experimenting with allowing direct player participation in the governance of the game. They've got a player council whose decisions actually carries weight within the sort of the physics of the rules of the game. And this is an experiment that I'm interested in, because I feel like there's something inherently authoritarian about any kind of game. It's the same thing that's authoritarian about a mystery story or a joke. If you get a vote on whether or not the suspense is going to end, chances are you will vote to reveal the ending ahead of where the author wants to reveal it. If you get a vote on when the punchline comes out, it's probably not going to be at the moment of optimum comedy. Part of the nature of that kind of entertainment is that it's paternalistic, right? We will come to the punchline when I judge it's best, not when you want to. And games are like that too,
And novels.
And novels, yeah, novels, exactly. And so, like tabletop role-playing games, the dungeon master would have a screen, and she would roll the dice behind the screen and tell you what the value was. And she could manufacture her own values for it, even if it wasn't the number that came up, in order to maximize the fun of the game. Even if it wasn't, even though it's technically it's a kind of cheating. So I'm really interested in what happens when you let players vote on the physics of the game, on the rules of the game, whether or not, if during play, giving players real-time lookouts into that might not degrade the fun.
Wow, that will be fascinating.
Yeah.
That really will be.